all the good stuff was already said though before the recording. So
I know,
it's
I
only
know.
downhill from here.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
So, as we mentioned, this is part of our master class and remaster pathway that we are kicking off today. This is a standing invite for Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Everything you need to know and should know about the transaction process. This will also extend to Fridays, which is about building your business and everything you need and should know about building your business from the ground up. And then also Mondays, which is all about contracts and documents. So standing appointments, 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays for anybody that's looking to jumpstart their business, reinvigorate their business, get back into the business. That's what we're all about. I will ask if you do plan on taking part in these classes and want to know more about the program, including getting daily tasks and activities to do for the next 90 days, please put your emails into the chat along with your name, and we will make sure that you get a calendar, a step-by-step guide, as well as put you on the automated system, which is forthcoming, where each day you will get, much like you get Robert's motivational message, each day you will get an email from us with the different tasks that you should complete each day, including these classes. So with that being said, I am going to put in the chat at the end of this slide deck, as well as a checklist of everything that we talked about. And I will also include the slide deck and the checklist of the listing side of the transaction. We will be doing that class later on in the year. So that we will be coming back around to a lot of these things. So it's not something that if you miss it, you can't access it because they are recorded. And it's also not something that you won't be able to do a live class later on. So, and then at the very end, I will show you all the different classes that we have coming up through the end of April. That's what we have scheduled as of now. And then by March 1st, we'll have everything through June. So the first half of the year is going to be mapped out Wednesday, Fridays, 10 a.m. Standing appointment. So with all that being said, again, if you want to be included in the program and want more information about the pathways and the calendar and the 90-day pathway, please put your email address and your name into the chat, and we will make sure you get that by the end of today, as well as get you set up on the automation. So as we mentioned, today we are going to be talking about the transaction process from the buyer side. Now, I will ask if you do have questions. We will leave time at the end. This slide deck will probably take about 40, 45 minutes, so we'll leave 10, 15, even 20 minutes at the end to go through questions and or scenarios if you need to. But basically, what I've done is put together a step-by-step guide and we'll let you know some of the pain points of why these steps are important and things to remember, and hopefully some things to avoid to keep you out of some trouble or some hot water that we've gotten into in the past. So if it is something urgent, go ahead and raise your hand because I'm not monitoring the chat. But if you want to put questions in the chat, I will check those at the end, and or you're free to unmute. I see Victor's got a question. Go ahead, Victor. So I see your hand went down, but you're still muted. I don't hear anything. If you want to unmute, go ahead.
Sorry,
there we go.
Sorry, Romeo. Yeah, it's a little hard to hear from you. Is your mic pointing at you, or it's like hollow. It's like sort of like you're in the background. Can you?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's just my speakers here. I don't know.
I'm not sure. If anybody else is having issues, let me know. Or it could be a speaker.
I guess it's just your microphone. Sure. That's okay. Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, I'll try and get a little bit closer and speak a little bit louder. So hopefully that'll help. So if you go ahead and put a question into the chat, I will get that at the end. If it's something urgent, definitely please raise your hand, and I will see that, but I won't see anything in the chat till the end. So today we're talking about the transaction process from the point you get your offer ratified. So and that basically is the first step and the first thing that we're going to talk about. So once you get your offer ratified, you need to make sure that you get the complete signed offer, any and all counters, addenda, anything that was part of the ratification of offer from the listing side. Now, one thing you want to note is when you actually received, and when I say received, meaning delivered by the listing side, okay? And or if it was a buyer counter offer, when you delivered it, okay? And that's important, and I'll explain why in a minute. You want to confirm that all docs, meaning contracts, are signed, initials, dated correctly, including all of the agent signatures, including yours. Okay, if there's one thing that we see when compliance is going through the files, is a lot of times we're so focused on getting all of the client signatures, we forget we're supposed to sign a lot of these contracts as well. So the last thing we want to do is have a deal held up because we forgot to sign, we forgot to date, or just something simple like one initial is missing. And one thing to note is that our compliance team is going through these things so they protect us in the future from any sort of blowback if there's any disputes on contracts. So I know sometimes it can get a little tedious and we can get a little frustrated with our compliance team. It seems like they are micromanaging, but they are here to protect you, to protect us. They're here for our best interest. So always remember that. They're just looking out for us, even though it may seem sometimes that they are targeting us and or being a little overzealous in what they're asking for. Now, we want to confirm all of the dates, okay? And if there's one thing that we note is that a lot of times listing agents and buyer's agents or escrow or lenders have a different interpretation of what the actual timeframes and dates should be. Now, remember I said take note of when that ratified offer was delivered, okay? There's a new point of emphasis in the counteroffers this year, and it extends to the purchase contract, okay? The purchase contract says that the time frame starts, okay, when the accepted offer is delivered to the other party, okay? Not necessarily when it's signed, that's when it's received, when it's delivered. Okay, so we need to take note of when, if we're on the buyer side and we're receiving the ratified offer, when the listing agent sent it to us, okay, and or if we're the buyers, okay, accepting when we as the buyer's agent are delivering it back to the listing side. That's when the time frames start, okay? So you may have a seller that signs a contract at 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, okay, but the agent doesn't receive it back in their email till Wednesday morning and delivers it to the buyer side Wednesday afternoon. Well, the time frame start on Wednesday, not necessarily when the seller signed. Okay. Now, can we go back and all agree that the contract starts when the seller signs? Yes, but that will take another written agreement. Okay. The way that the contract is stated, if we look on the purchase contract and or look on the counteroffers, okay, it says that the contract date starts when it's delivered. So, and I know that can be a little bit confusing for everybody because you have a contract date on the top of a contract, you have when the buyer submitted the contract, you have when the seller signed it, you have all these dates on counteroffers, okay, but the actual date the contract signs is when it's delivered. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and I'm sure there's gonna be questions on that at the end and we can discuss that. So let's just hold those to the end. So it's always important, confirm those key dates, make sure everybody's on the same page from day one. The last thing we want to have happen is on day 21, when a contingency is supposed to be removed, okay, one side thinks it's day 21, the other side thinks it's only day 20. All right, so we want to know those things up front. There's no disputes, and we set the expectations right from the start. May seem like a simple thing, but it can make all the difference in the world. Now, if the buyer's getting financing, we need to make sure we get that ratified offer to the lender ASAP. Okay, as soon as you receive it, you want to get it to the lender so they can start working on it. Okay, the thing that usually takes the most time in a real estate transaction is the loan process. So the sooner we can get the lender involved, the sooner we can get the process started, and the better chance we have to stay on track and on time. We also want to confirm that the lender is going to order that appraisal right away. Okay, we no longer, as realtors, okay, back in the old days, we used to be able to pick and choose and order the appraisals ourselves. Now that's all done through the lenders, and it's done through an automated process in most cases. So if you're in an area with a lot of activity, usually you can get an appraisal fairly quickly. If it's a remote area, there may be a little bit of a delay in trying to find an appraiser who's going to go out to that particular area. So we want to make sure that the lender gets that appraisal set up right away. Now, the lender's the one that's responsible for it, so there's nothing for us to do, but we are working for the buyer need to make sure that we're keeping the lender on task and on time. So that is our duty, is to make sure that the lender's doing everything we need them to do for our buyer, okay? Now, the other thing is make sure that the lender puts you as the point of contact, okay? So the appraiser is contacting you to set up the appointment. This allows you control over A, when they go out there, but B, the fact that you can actually be there. Now, this becomes especially important in areas where you think there might be a little bit of a question or might be a little trouble with the appraisal, or on something that you want to make sure that the appraiser knows pertinent information. Okay, you can no longer have any contact. You don't get contact information for the appraiser anymore, like you used to be able to send them things back and forth or discuss these things. So your only opportunity might be at the property where you can hand them a comp, where you can explain to them why this property should be appraised higher than the one across the street, little things like that, okay? You remain in control of that situation if you are the point of contact. If the listing agent is the point of contact, a lot of times the appraisal will happen, you won't even know it, okay? So make sure that you discuss with the lender that you should be the point of contact. The other thing you need to discuss with the lender is if there's any concessions, okay? A lot of times you will build in a credit, you will build in some type of, the buyers are getting a gift for the down payment, there's some down payment assistance, something of that sort. The lender needs to know that right away, okay, to make sure that it's something that the lender will, in fact, allow, and or the lender may need to find a different program that will allow exactly what we're looking for. So we need to make sure that they know that right away. And the last thing, once we get the ratified contract, is we need to make sure it's uploaded into SkySlope, okay? Now, with SkySlope, getting it uploaded to SkySlope, that alerts the compliance team that we have a ratified contract. That takes care of your obligation of notifying the broker of a ratified deal. Now, you're supposed to notify the broker of any contract within 24 hours. In the old days, you had to email it off, you had to bring it into the office, you had to do all these things. Now, you simply upload it to SkySlope and you've taken care of your obligation, okay? So make sure that is done sooner rather than later, because again, that allows our compliance team to make sure all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and everything is in compliance. So once we've done that, now we need to move on to sort of the nuts and bolts of the contract, the disclosures, inspections, reports, okay? In most cases nowadays, you get a disclosure package up front, okay? So in most cases, you're going through that with your buyer before they even make an offer. In the old days and in rare cases, you won't get those things up front. So now it's up to you to make sure that you're obtaining those for your buyer. The California purchase contract technically allows 7 days for the seller to get you all the pertinent information about the property. So it's up to us as the buyer's agents to make sure we're getting that, okay? The other thing is, just because we get a disclosure package doesn't mean that everything that's in there is. So we need to make sure we're going through it and determining if there's everything that we need. So if we haven't already done so, now we need to review with the buyer all of the disclosures, and or, especially if there's inspections or reports, you can reach out, okay? Not everybody knows this, but we as agents, okay, most of us are not qualified to speak on inspections and reports. We can review them and we can discuss them with our clients, but we are not the experts, okay? What we can do is reach out to the experts. So if XYZ contractor did a home inspection, we can reach out to XYZ contractor, okay, and have them discuss that inspection report with the client. All right, same goes with the pest, roof, any other inspections or reports they have on file. Same goes for NHD, okay? That's one of the big reasons that we are huge proponents and love using property ID, is because they offer that type of service, and they are the first ones to stand up and say, please don't discuss this with your clients, please let us do it. Okay, so defer to the experts on any inspections and reports. As I mentioned before, just because we get a disclosure package doesn't mean everything that needs to be in there is. So what we need to do is we need to match all of the documents that we either received prior to writing the offer and or received from the listing agent after we ratified, and match that against our appropriate Century 21 Masters checklist, okay, whether it's a residential transaction, commercial transaction, lease transaction. We have checklists that our compliance team has spent painstakingly hours and hours and hours putting together, again, for our protection, as well as our clients, to make sure that everything is in there that we need. Now, there are some things that are on our checklist that technically aren't required by law. So you may, every once in a while, get some pushback from an agent saying it's not required, and that's okay. Those are things that we require on our side, and we're going to make every attempt to get the other side, whether it's the buyer or the listing, to sign off on them. And if they do, great. If they don't, well, we can't force anybody to sign things. But talking about those type of things is a task for another day. And we'll talk about disclosures and contracts on Mondays at a later time. So if there is anything missing from our checklist, okay, now it's up to us, go into SkySlope Forms, and we need to create those documents. Okay, create the documents, send them to our buyer for signature, and again, once our buyer signs, send them to the other side, the listing side, and have them sign. Now, again, we can't force them to sign them, but it is our duty and as part of our due diligence to make sure that we're making that attempt. Okay, once we have all of those documents, whether it's, again, at ratification, after the seller sends it to us, and or after we produce all the documents and get them signed, we need to then upload them to SkySlope. Again, that will trigger our compliance team for a review. They'll go through everything, make sure everything we need is there, and everything that is there is fully complete. Okay, so you'll get emails throughout the process from the compliance team through SkySlope to make sure that everything is in order and set for the next phase. So now, one thing to note is, especially where we ratify a deal, I mean, this seems like a lot of different steps, but all these things are happening usually within the first few days of getting a ratified contract, okay? So the next thing we need to do, and this is something that I refer simply to title, okay, because I'm from Northern California. So when we talk about the escrow and title process, we're typically refer to title because that's how things are handled here by a title company, all in one. Now, I know down in Southern California, it's done differently with escrow and title separate. So we need to open escrow, okay, if we're doing it from a buyer side. Northern California, technically, buyers pay for escrow and title. So therefore, they're the ones that get to choose. So when we ratify a deal, it's usually up to the buyer. Now, with that being said, things are so competitive here in Northern California. A lot of times buyers are going to defer to whoever the seller set up as a pre-escrow, just because they think it's going to one less thing or hurdle to get over to get their offer accepted. So if the buyer is choosing, then they need to contact the escrow company and open up an escrow. And that with that becomes a prelim because we're also getting title with that. Or they need to reach out to the company that the seller had, the pre-escrow company, and confirm the ratified contract and transaction. Now, up here, our escrow and title companies, all they want is the last page of the contract. They don't care about anything else. I know in a lot of other areas, the escrow company wants the fully ratified contract. So you need to make sure that you're sending that down to them. We then need to arrange either the wire, so the contract is defaulted that the buyer is going to wire their earnest money deposit or initial deposit directly to the escrow company. Okay, a lot of times up here, just because it's been such a, people have been so conditioned to it, a lot of times we will have actual checks that'll either need to be picked up by an escrow or title rep or dropped off at the title company. But per the contract, we're going to arrange to have it wired. Now, because wire fraud is so rampant, we want to make sure that we are discussing with our clients the fact that they need to make sure that they're confirming all of the uh, information with their escrow officer before wiring. That usually or should entail an actual direct conversation. Phil, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Romeo, I hear background noise. It's a little interference. I don't know who's not muted, but it's well, right now I don't hear it, but it was like really bad about a minute ago.
Yeah, it looks like someone connecting to audio from C21 Long Beach.
Okay, so they're the ones interference. If you can let them mute themselves, thank you.
Yeah, if we can have everybody mute, that would be fantastic. And I'd appreciate that. I believe Neil's got the controls, so he's actually the one that can mute everybody. But if anybody can mute, that would be absolutely fantastic and greatly appreciated. So again, going back, we definitely want to make sure that we connect our client and the escrow officer directly to confirm the wire instructions, just so that we take away the possibility of any type of wire fraud, because that is something that is extremely, extremely common nowadays. And as soon as your client gets into escrow, it's very, very possible they'll get an email saying, send us the earnest money deposit. But it's not actually from the person that is designated to receive it. So let's be very, very cognizant of that and very careful with that. Now, as we mentioned up here in Northern California, once we open escrow, it automatically triggers getting a preliminary title report because our escrow and title are one and the same. So down in our other areas, we'll need to open title. Again, that's if the escrow officer is not already doing that for you. Now, in most cases, your escrow officer is going to do that for you at your direction of which title company you want to use. Now, once we get that prelim, and a lot of times we already receive that as part of our disclosure package, it's important to review that with the buyers. Now, it's very common for agents to basically hand off the prelim and inspections and reports to their buyers and just say review it, okay? However, if push comes to shove and there's any dispute, okay, and we see this all the time, if and when you get called in a, let's say, a legal dispute, and you are asked what your role was and what you did with the transaction, one of the common questions is, did you review an inspection or report prelim? Okay, and if the answer is no, well, then you haven't conducted your due diligence. If the answer is yes, then they're going to ask, well, did you review it with the client? Okay, so we need to make sure that, again, that's kind of one of those I's dotted, T's crossed. Now, we are not the experts on these things, so that's why we have title officers. So if there's any questions, that's when we bring in our title officer to answer the question about any liens, encumbrances, encroachments, easements, all of the E's, if you will, and discuss those with the client, because where that may not affect close of escrow, it may affect title or possession or transferring the property at a later time. So it's really important that our buyers get all that information up front. And again, we don't have to be the experts on this. We just need to make sure that we're getting our buyer in touch with the person who is the expert. And in this case, it would be the title officer. Now, if our buyer is going to be doing any of their own due diligence, and I know we're in competitive markets in a lot of places that, you know, putting contingencies or asking for inspections and reports may be the kiss of death in getting your offer accepted, excuse me. That may be the case, but we also need to make sure that we're protecting our buyer, and our buyer knows that they have the rights to ask for these things. The other thing is, just because the buyer chooses not to have a contingency does not mean that they aren't allowed to do any inspections and reports. In fact, the contract actually says they can. Okay, so the contract says even if they don't have contingencies, they have full rights to do their full due diligence and any inspections and reports they choose. Okay, And it's something that a lot of agents take for granted, or agents don't necessarily know. So you may even get pushback from the listing agent. Okay, if you don't have a contingency and you're asking for an inspection or report, the listing agent says, no, you can't. Well, the fact of the matter is, yes, you can, and your buyers need to know that. So it's always a good idea if an inspection report is being done that the buyer is present. So that way they can ask questions, they can get firsthand information, and they're not relying just on a written report and or you trying to relay that information. Okay, now that's where a lot of agents get into trouble in that they're the ones who are interpreting the inspection report. They're the ones who are at the actual inspection, and they pass along information that they think pertinent. But it's not the information that the buyer may necessarily think pertinent. So if and when at all possible, we always want the buyers to be present for inspections and reports, especially if they're the ones who are ordering and paying for it. Now, in addition to inspections and reports, and this is something that is becoming more and more and more of an issue and something that needs to be done much sooner than later, just like we get that contract to the lender ASAP, we need our buyer to reach out to their insurance carrier ASAP, okay? Because more and more, we're finding that certain properties, A, are not being insured by certain carriers, or B, that the insurance on those properties is 2, 3, 10 times more than a buyer was expecting or hoping to pay. So we need to make sure that those things are done within our contingency period, okay? So that when the contingencies are removed, the buyer's not left holding the bag of not being able to get insurance and or having to pay a premium that they were not expecting, all right? So just like, as I mentioned, getting the lender involved, getting the escrow company involved, getting any inspections involved, getting insurance done within the first couple of days is imperative. Now, again, it's probably not something we're doing. That's something the buyer's doing, but we need to make sure that we're on top of the buyer and making sure they're following through with that, because that definitely is something that can make or break a deal at the end. A lender will not lend on a property that's not insured. So for whatever reason, this is in a flood zone or a high fire zone and certain carriers don't want anything to do with it. Well, then the buyer is going to be left holding the bag of not getting insurance and not being able to get a loan because of that. So hopefully everybody's following along with this. So if the buyer is doing their own inspections and reports, once they're done, then obviously we want to review those with the buyer. If they're not and they're relying on the existing inspections and reports or none at all, well, that's their prerogative, but we need to make sure that they are aware that they can and have the ability to do these things. So if new inspection reports are done, the buyer needs to acknowledge that they've seen and received these inspection reports, okay? And then those need to be uploaded to SkySlope. Now, if buyer does their own due diligence and realizes there's things that, about the property that weren't as expected, there's things that need to be fixed, there's some health and safety issues, okay? They may want to ask for the seller to do those repairs. So that's where we sit down and discuss those with the buyer and propose any necessary requests that we're going to send to the seller, okay? And or any amendments to the contract, whether it's a concession, a reduction in price, an extension because you need to do more investigation, okay? As long as you're doing that within your timeframes, okay, it's well within the buyer's right. The buyer needs to understand and realize that just because they're asking for these things doesn't necessarily mean that the seller has to agree to it. Okay, it's not a fait accompli that the seller is going to say, okay, okay. Once the buyer asks for a change to the contract, the seller then has 3 options. They can say yes, they can say no, or they can propose a different option. Okay, and then it goes back to the buyer. So it becomes just like the offer process with an offer and a counter offer. Okay, so the buyer can ask for whatever they want, but the seller doesn't necessarily have to agree. So we have to make sure that our buyer understands that they are negotiating against something that doesn't necessarily have any negotiation power. Now, it's one of those that, the longer the property is on the market, the fewer opportunities that the seller may have of offers, things of that sort, the better chance the buyer has. And those are all things that we as agents need to kind of dig in and realize. So we need to constantly be in contact with the listing agent. Do they have backup offers in place? Are showings still going on? Are they still doing open houses? Are they still actively looking for other offers or marketing the property? Okay. Or was this property on the market for 60 days already? And, the agent says, market pending, no more showings. So we know that no other offers are coming in. Well, maybe now we've got, a little bit more bargaining power than we would if there's, 3 or 4 backup offers, or if it was a competitive offer situation in the first place. So those are all things that we sit down and consult with the buyer on the next steps to take. So we as the agent, okay, we're ordering these inspections and reports and doing the buyer's due diligence, or helping the buyer do their due diligence, okay? We also have to go and do our own inspection, okay? So for agents who haven't been through a transaction yet and may not understand or know what this is called an AVID, okay? Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure. And that is required of both listing agents and buyer's agents on every residential transaction that we do. So essentially, we have to go through the property and note anything that we notice that may or may not influence a buyer's decision to purchase that property, and or may have an impact on what the buyer is willing to pay. Now, it's really important that we just describe what we see and not necessarily think or assume what may be a problem or what may be wrong, okay? That's where agents kind of get a little out of their comfort zone. If they see a stain in the ceiling and they say there's a leak in the ceiling, all right? Well, we don't necessarily know that there's a leak. We just see that there's a stain. So make sure that when we're doing our AVID, we're just describing what we see, not what we think the cause or what a possible outcome is. Okay, so that's really, really important. Now, if the buyer is getting a loan, we need to make sure that we're assisting the buyer with any underwriting conditions. Okay, the lender may keep coming back saying, we need more paperwork, we need more information, we need, X, Y, and Z. So it's important that we communicate with the lender right up front to make sure that we are CC'd on all of those communications, so that we can either help the buyer and or make sure that the buyer stays on task and on time. Okay, and the other thing is we want to make sure we're scheduling constant check-ins with the lender, so that we make sure that if there's anything we need to do, anything we help with, we can get that done sooner rather than later. Because as we mentioned, the thing that's going to take the most time in a transaction is the loan process. Okay, and then we need to propose any necessary amendments to the seller, and that may be because the appraisal came in short, or the lender isn't going to lend on the full amount, or whatever it might be. So we need to discuss with the buyer the options for those different scenarios and determine how the buyer is going to want to proceed. Now, once we've gone through all of those processes, okay, the buyer has their due diligence period. The seller may have some contractual obligations. As we talked about, they have 7 days to provide us with all the documentation and disclosures and things of that sort. There may be other seller obligations as well. We may have already asked for things to be fixed or repaired. The seller may be in an area that requires them to do certain work and to provide certain things for the property, such as in San Francisco, the seller is required to provide what's called a 3R report, a report of residential records, and it's basically the permit history of a property. In Oakland, the seller is required to do a sewer lateral inspection, and if the inspection comes back that the sewer lateral is in disrepair, it actually has to be fixed. Okay, and that's a city and a lot of times county ordinance for these type of things. So it's up to us as the buyer's agent to make sure that all of these things are being done, okay, and provided for to our buyer prior to close of escrow. So we need to stay on task and make sure that we're communicating with the listing agent and making sure that they are staying on time and on task with getting us those items. Now, assuming we are getting everything from the seller side and the buyer has already gone through their due diligence with their inspections, reports, insurance, appraisal, loan, okay, we need to discuss with the buyer that now is the time to remove the contingencies. Okay, now they can be all done at once. They can be done at different times. It just depends on what the actual contract calls for. In most cases, the contract's going to call for 17 days for the appraisal and inspections, and this is by default, and 21 days for a loan contingency. Now, those timeframes can be shortened, they can be extended, they can be all made to one time frame. You know, it's up to you and the buyer when you're putting an offer together. Okay, and we will do classes on how to put offers together, and those will be obviously on Mondays. So we'll talk about that more in depth. But right now, we need to make sure that we're managing that contract and making sure we're staying on time with those contingency removals. If at any point we think we are not going to be on time, well, we need to discuss with our buyer, okay, well, do we still want to proceed? And if we do, we probably need to ask for an extension. Or if we don't want to proceed, well, then we need to cancel the contract based on those contingencies. Okay. And what we need to make sure is that our buyer is fully comfortable. A lot of times what agents will do is they'll get inspection reports back and then go to the buyer and say, well, we got our inspections and reports, here's a contingency removal, okay? And not sit down and discuss with them what their obligations are in terms of removing that contingency and what the consequences may be if they do remove that contingency, or vice versa, what the consequences might be if they don't remove the contingency. Okay, so there's a lot of different scenarios there that we need to discuss with the buyer and make sure that they are the ones making the decision, not doing just exactly what we tell them. Okay, because when push comes to shove, again, if we ever get into a legal dispute, the judge or arbitrator or attorneys are going to ask, well, who made the decision? All right. And if it's one of those things that we didn't discuss and leave it up to the buyers, then all of a sudden, all the liability points to us. Okay. So now at this point, we also want to make sure and confirm who's responsible for a home warranty if one is included in the contract. Okay. If the seller is responsible for it, make sure we're getting a copy or a confirmation from the listing side. Or if the buyer was responsible for it, make sure that we are actually placing the order and putting it into escrow for payment with that invoice. Okay, so now this is sort of getting towards the end of the escrow period. Okay, now we're looking at somewhere 3-4 weeks into the process when contingencies are removed, home warranties being ordered. We're getting down to the end of the process. Okay, so once we get down to the end of the process, now we need to complete our escrow and closing instructions. And this is basically a sheet, and we do have a template at Century 21 Masters that is basically going to give all the pertinent information: who the buyers are, who the sellers are, the purchase price, who the agents are, what the commission splits are, who's paying the commissions, any expenses for reports, repairs, credits. This is where everything that's going to be on the closing statement is listed. Okay, and both the buyer side and the seller side are going to send this to escrow. And assuming everything matches, this is what escrow is going to create our closing statement from. Okay, so our escrow and closing instructions are signed by the agent, but they also need to be sent to the broker. Okay, so in this case, we send it to Randy and or Steve for signature. They're obviously going to review everything, make sure that it's in order, sign it, in which case then you forward that on to the escrow officer. We're also going to upload that to SkySlope because that becomes part of how internally we determine who's getting paid and what they're getting paid. Okay, so this is an important step in the process for agents because this is kind of the first step to you getting your check. Okay, now once we've sent those escrow and closing instructions to the escrow company, or like we call it up here, title company, they're going to generate an estimated closing statement. Now, they may have already done so based on the loan information and what they know about the city and county transfer taxes and the escrow and title fees. Okay, so that may already be in place, but they don't have the final details in terms of any expenses, credits, concessions, things of that sort. So once they do produce that final estimated closing statement, we need to make sure we sit down with the buyer, okay, and review it and make sure that everything that the buyer was expecting, okay, is actually on there. Okay, and there's nothing that's unexpected, such as we talked about earlier, you know, an insurance premium that's 10 times what they were expecting, or the fact that they're paying for the home warranty and not the seller because that's what they thought. You know, little things like that. The last thing we want to have happen is the buyer set up for their signing, and it's the first time they're seeing this closing statement, only to have questions and or negative reactions to something that is on there. Okay, because at that point, that may delay your closing. So we want to, prior to the buyer getting their documents to sign, make sure that they are fully comfortable with everything that's going to be on the closing statement, all of the expenses, all of the charges, all of the funds that are going to be needed to brought to closing in order to get this closed. Okay. Once they have reviewed and are comfortable with it, we're going to schedule a final sign. Now, in the old days, the clients would go into the escrow or title company to sign. Now, everything's pretty much done remotely. Okay, so a signer is going to come to them to actually get everything signed. And that's another reason that we want the clients to actually see the estimated closing statements before they sign, because a lot of times it's just a closing agent or a signer that's with them. So it's not an actual escrow officer or somebody from the title company that can actually explain why something's being charged and or make adjustments or changes if need be. Okay, a lot of times it's just simply a notary or a signer that's going out and doing these things that has no control. Okay, so that's why we want to do those first. So once we schedule the final signing, now we need to have the buyer arrange for closing funds to be sent to escrow. Now, just like with the EMD, we need to make sure that the buyer connects directly with the escrow officer, confirms the actual amount, whether it's on the phone or in person, and gets those details directly, okay, from the escrow officer. Don't rely on just an email or a text or something random that comes to them. All right. Again, with the earnest money deposit, we're talking usually 3% of the closing price. A lot of times with the closing funds, it's 10, 20, 30% of the actual purchase price. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in some cases. Okay. And then what we need to do is we need to coordinate with the listing agent. How is possession going to be delivered? Okay. Is possession being delivered at close of escrow? Is it being delivered at 5 p.m. 6 p.m. on the date of close of escrow? Is there some type of seller lease back or a rent back where they're going to stay for a certain amount of time? We need to make sure that we're coordinating all those things. And then how and when we're going to get possession to transfer to our buyer. Okay, so those are all things that should be discussed prior to close of escrow, so we have that all in order. Okay, and then finally, last step, we're almost done here. We need to arrange a final walkthrough. Now, the California purchase contract allows for the buyer to do a final walkthrough through the property. Okay, agents don't always take this step and don't remind the buyers that they have the right to do so. And agents let this close escrow, and all of a sudden the buyer takes possession and realizes there's something wrong with the property, or there's something that wasn't that is different than when they actually made the offer. Well, those are things that need to be done, 3, 4, 5 days prior to close of escrow, so that if there is any items that the buyers have questions on, or is wrong with the property and or is different from when the buyers made offer, we can send that to the listing agent and sellers and have that addressed. Okay, so again, part of the contractual obligation is the sellers to allow that final walkthrough. Part of their buyer due diligence is to do that final walkthrough. Don't do it for your buyers. Okay, every once in a while we see, well, the buyer wasn't available, so the agent did the walkthrough for them. Okay, again, that puts all the liability on us or on you as the agent. That's not what you want. Okay, because just because you think something is pertinent, or more importantly, don't think it's pertinent, doesn't necessarily mean the buyers wouldn't. Okay. Then we need to confirm with escrow and title that the property has been recorded. As soon as it's recorded, that means that your buyer is now the new owner. Okay, so that's when they officially can take possession of the property. But may not be the case in terms of what was previously negotiated. Okay, whether it's again 5 or 6 o'clock on the day of, the day after, 30 days after, 2 months after, if there's a lease back, something of that sort. That's for us to determine beforehand, before close of escrow. Okay, but assuming that the buyer is going to get possession, then we need to set up a time to deliver possession and the keys, whether it's keys and remote controls and codes for the alarms, key fobs, anything of that sort. We need to make sure we have in our possession so that we can transfer to the buyer. Now, big no-no is to transfer those things prior to recording. Okay, every once in a while, for our buyer's convenience, or more importantly for our convenience, we're going out of town on a Friday in the morning, and it's not supposed to schedule to close in the afternoon. We'll say, you know what, here, buyer, here's all the keys. Please don't go in until it closes escrow. Well, that may or may not happen. So we need to make sure that we are not giving any advanced possession to our buyers, because then again, we become liable and we are on the hook for it. Okay. Every once in a while, a buyer will ask for possession. If we're the listing side, we almost exclusively say no, because usually no good can happen of a buyer taking possession early, only bad things. But every once in a while on the buyer side, that may need to be asked, and we always ask on their behalf. But we want to make sure that if there is an early possession, that there is some sort of reduction of liability to the sellers, to the agents, to the brokers, if that does happen. Okay, it's a very rare case, but something to note. And if there's ever a question on early possession, please call your director, call me, call Randy, call Matt, because that's definitely something we're going to want to discuss. Now, we've closed escrow, we've given possession. Okay, make sure that's not the last time that the clients hear from you. Okay? Make sure you're setting them up on a preferred client club. You're scheduling some sort of drip campaign. You're staying in touch with them somehow. Okay, it never fails that as soon as escrow closes, that we go on to the next escrow, we go on to the next buyer, the next listing, and these sellers or buyers, are left fending for themselves when it comes time to sell again. What we know is that most agents do not stay in touch. Okay, don't be one of those agents. Don't lose the next deal because you didn't take the time. And it only takes a few minutes to set up your clients once you close escrow on a drip campaign or on a preferred client club or something. Make sure that these clients buy from you. When they turn around and want to sell, they're going to sell from you, and they're going to refer all of their clients to you. I didn't put it on here, but this is the perfect opportunity, okay, to now ask these clients, who do you know that I might be able to help either buy or list a property? Right now, when they get the keys, that feeling of euphoria is coming over them. They are now homeowners. This is the perfect opportunity. They're feeling great about everything that you did and were able to help them accomplish. Now is the time to ask for that more business. So don't sleep on that as well. So with all of that being said, okay, we've just gone through ratified contract, through closing, through staying in touch with the clients. Okay, who has questions? Go ahead and unmute, or I'm going to jump into the chat and see what we have in the chat as well.
I had a question, Romeo, Al here.
Please.
Yeah, so if we're pretty much done as real estate agents and we're just waiting for the verification of property condition, and let's say for some odd reason, we have our buyer sign off on the VOP, but the seller has already left town or we can't find them and we're supposed to close that same day, usually without a VOP, our sky slope is incomplete. Are we still allowed to provide something in writing to our compliance officer, letting them know that we don't have the VOP signed off by the seller because we can't find them? Are we still able to close given that circumstance, or are we going to be held back?
That depends on the buyer. So if the buyer is signing off and saying that the property is in the condition they want, as long as we've taken the buyer through the final walkthrough, have them sign off on it, and can show that we've sent this to the listing agent and attempt to get them to sign off on it, then yes, we can close, and that is sufficient evidence for compliance to mean that we've done our due diligence. Now, if there's issues or problems with the properties that the buyer wants to be addressed, then we can hold the closing. And I say we, meaning the buyer can hold the closing. That's not something agents have the discretion or the ability to do. But if the buyer wants to hold closing because the seller is not responsive to items on the verification of property, then yes, we can hold the escrow until the seller responds and to the buyer's satisfaction.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
So I just put up on the screen, this is all of the slides we put it into a checklist with each item that you can go through and obviously create for each particular property and then check off as you go. As I mentioned, I will put all of the slides and the checklist into the chat as well as the listing side and that checklist into the chat for everybody to download and use at your leisure. The other thing is I mentioned that I wanted to show is our list of upcoming classes. Okay, I think we showed this at the monthly connect last Thursday. But you can see here today we have Anatomy of Transaction on the purchase side. Friday, we're going to be talking about business planning basics. Monday is all the new laws and form updates for 2026. Next Wednesday, we have Mastering Century 21 Commercial. So if anybody's thinking about diving into the commercial realm, this is the perfect opportunity to learn about those type of transactions. Friday, setting up your mission and vision statement, as well as identifying where business can come from. You see, we have all of the March classes set up and all of the April classes set up as well. All of these are already on the Master's Resource Guide, but just so you can see them sort of in a list format, here they are. So I will put this into the chat so you can download this as well. As mentioned, if I can get everybody to put their names and email addresses into the chat, then what we will do is make sure that you get the 90-day calendar to start the masterclass pathway, as well as get you set up once the experience team is ready, get you set up on the daily automated task list, where each day you're going to get a new task to complete for the day. So hopefully this has been a good use of your Wednesday mornings and you learned something useful. And it's one of those things that my philosophy, whenever I go to a class, whenever I'm teaching a class, is if I can come away or somebody can come away with one useful tip, then it was well worth the time and effort that we all put into it. So I don't see, I do see can you put the checklist on the chat? Yes, all that's going to go into the chat in a minute. But if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to unmute or put them in the chat and we will go ahead and address those. And I am going to add all of those files to the chat right now. So feel free to unmute and ask a question if you have a question. And or once you put your contact information into the chat, you're free to get on with your Wednesdays. And we'll see everybody hopefully on Friday for setting up your business plan. Okay, so I'm now putting the files into the chat. So there's the first two. Okay, and now putting in the listing side ones. So you'll have those for download. And again, I wish everybody a very, very happy Wednesday. I will hang out here for a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll see everybody on Friday.
Thank you, Romeo. Good job. Thank you. Learned a lot.
Okay, doesn't think there are any more questions, but I will leave the chat open till about 11. So if anybody didn't put their name and email address into the chat, please do so now. And I will leave that